Well, hello again, whiskey folks. It is me, your whiskey coach, back at it for review number. Goodness, I have to check when I go to upload this. I believe it's 84. Shame on me. Why do you say shame on me, you ask? Let me start by saying, being many of your whiskey coaches, as my title says, self-given title says, it's a big responsibility when you think of just this one category that we've been really diving into lately, bourbon, to make sure I do a good enough job to cover all of the wonderful brands, distilleries, products out there with you guys at some point. At least dabble. I'm not going to get into every bottling, of course, at least not in this lifetime. But at least talk about some of the titans in the industry with you in just the one category. I'm not even talking Irish, Canadian rums, all the cognacs, the other things that I'll do, scotches. But the fact that I haven't talked to you all once about this famous red dripping wax that is Maker's Mark is shame on me time. So I'm going to go ahead and take your criticism. I can feel it coming, and I'm going to soak it in and say, you're right, I'm wrong, my bad. Okay, so now that that is done and over with, let's jump right into tonight's review. Tonight's review is Maker's Mark Cask Strength version. I decided if I'm going to do Maker's Mark, I'm going to do it aggressively. And I'm going to jump into the Cask Strength edition. So you can't talk about a Maker's Mark review without at least running down the Samuels family history here a little bit. So Maker's Mark is this unbelievably beautiful, extremely rural distillery in a little town called Loretto. It's kind of off the beaten track, even on the Bourbon Trail. It's just kind of on its own little thing. It's kind of in the middle of the state down there, south of everything. You feel like you are driving into who knows where when you head down there, but once you arrive, it is like a postcard. I mean, absolutely beautiful grounds. And it's kind of rolling hills, and there's a little creek that runs right through it, and everything's painted like black with like red trim, and the windows are shaped almost like the bottles. It's just absolutely stunning. But the story starts. Well, it starts before this, but the modern Maker's Mark story starts in 1953 when Bill Samuels Sr. basically he wanted to recreate what he thought was about a 107-year-old recipe for making bourbon that his family had. The legend is that he accidentally burnt the recipe up. And in the process, by the way, burnt some curtains, I guess, that were at hanging on a window near wherever this recipe caught on fire. I think more of the truth is that he frankly thought that the recipe was awful and didn't like what the bourbon tasted like. So he decided to create his own bourbon. Really cool thing he did. He decided to kind of experiment. Changed kind of the tradition that bourbon had always kind of followed, with 51% corn at least, and then typically a rye, and then maybe some malted barley after that. He decided to experiment by actually baking bread, because why put a bunch of whiskey away for years and years and decide after that what you liked. He decided he was going to try to fast forward this process a little bit, so he started baking bread and finding out what bread he liked. In terms of the grain that he would use, and he found out that he liked red winter wheat. So he decided to basically make a wheated bourbon, as we call them today. So this is basically, Bill Samuels Jr. is basically the godfather of wheated bourbon, which is a tremendous thing to say, a tremendous honor, but it's really the truth. So that's by the way, that's the first thing we're going to talk about that's amazing about the Samuels and what they kind of revolutionized in terms of the bourbon industry. I mentioned the grounds, the facility, the distillery. They also basically invented bourbon tourism. I'll get to that here in a second. But yeah, they really started, Bill Samuels Sr. really started wheated bourbon. He then eventually ended up passing it down to Bill Samuels Jr., who is known to be a little bit wacky when it comes to marketing and advertising, and he was known to dress in drag and put wigs on and dress like a clown and do whatever he needed to do to draw attention to his brand in the category of bourbon at the time, in the mid-70s when he took over, was really, really struggling. So Bill was kind of a revolution. Bill Jr., I should say, was quite the revolutionary spokesman, if you will. If any of you are baseball fans, you might know the name Bill Veeck. Bill Veeck was an amazing promoter in baseball, and he was known for doing all sorts of things like disco night in Chicago. And he had a 3'11" little person come into a game as the smallest person in baseball history and get an intentional walk. His name was Eddie Geidel. But an amazing promoter, kind of a wacky guy. That's almost like Bill Samuels Jr. in bourbon. So another unique thing about Maker's Mark was Margie Samuels, the wife of Bill, is really who's credited with that world famous trademark red wax. She kind of took it upon herself to beautify the grounds, come up with this now world famous kind of brand. Everyone knows Maker's Mark. That's one of the most famous, iconic images or brandings in all of American products, let alone bourbon. So they kind of started with this beautiful craft feel, this workmanship thing. That's all Margie Samuels and this hand dip red wax and these hand cut labels that they do. That's all her. Which is really cool. Kind of, again, that first craft feel in this industry to give it a little bit of a premier product or a premier bourbon feel. So that's another thing was really kind of cool. What they, this famous logo that you've seen a million times, it's going to be hard to see in this glass, but it's right here. It's that S. And then it's a Roman numeral for IV, which is 4. Here, you can see it better on the 46. Wax. That's kind of that famous Maker's Mark logo. What that actually stands for is Samuels, S for Samuels. And then the Roman numeral 4 was to honor Bill Sr., which at the time she and he thought was a 4th generation distiller. Turns out, after doing some research, he's actually the 6th generation distiller. But that's where that came from. And the star, they call the distillery Star Hill. So that's kind of where that came from. Kind of neat. And they kind of use that logo like a Maker's Mark, so to speak. Something else extremely unique about Maker's Mark that I don't think enough people know about or talk about is the fact that, number one, they age to taste. So you won't see a lot of age-dated products in their portfolio. And they rotate their barrels. So what does rotate their barrels mean? So nobody else, at least that I'm aware of, at least in a large scale, does this. But they hand rotate their barrels. So meaning, if they start a barrel on the top floor of a rick house, they're going to move it down throughout its life cycle. If they start at the bottom, they're going to move it up. So each barrel has got an opportunity to age in different places in the warehouse, which, if you think about it, in theory, is going to create a consistent standard product. And that's exactly what they were looking for when they decided to do that. That's really, really cool. They want the product to taste the same today as it tasted in 1953. So if you like Maker's Mark today, you're going to like it 53 years from now, 100 years from now. So they're looking for that consistent flavor profile, which I think is kind of cool. Something, again, that they do that other folks don't do. So we've talked about them being kind of the starter, the trailblazers when it comes to marketing. We talked about them being really the godfathers of wheated whiskey. We talked about them being kind of the godfathers distillery tours. They have a restaurant there, by the way, it's beautiful. We talked about rotating their barrels. I mean, they're doing an amazing, amazing list of things now. Fast forward to 2010, they decided they were going to launch another product. We talked about, obviously, tonight we're going to review this cask strength version. And as you can see, this is going to be a long one tonight, so I hope you're enjoying the storytelling a little bit. So in 2010, they launched that Maker's 46, which is basically an additional aged Maker's Mark where they add a stave that has a flavor profile on it, a seasoned stave, which, by the way, the little underground bunker down in Loretto where they do their 46 and their 46 private barrel selection stuff is so cool. My wife and I were down there in July, and it was about 50 degrees in there, 45 degrees in there, just naturally, just because it's dug in the side of this hill, and that's where they age and mature all of those bottles. Really, really cool. But in 2010, they decided to launch that. So after 50 years of doing the same thing, they decided, all right, let's stretch our wings a little bit, and they started doing that. A few years after that, they started to say, you know what? Let's offer something that's a little more aggressive. This is bottled between 108 and 113 proof. This particular batch is batch 15-03, and it comes in at 111.4 proof, opposed to the traditional 90 proof that you'll see in their standard offering. By the way, more little fun fact for you. Handful of years ago now, they really, I shouldn't say considered, they actually launched, they announced and they launched their product at 80 proof. Well, there was such a huge outcry from fans that they decided, we better pull the plug on that, and they quickly went back to a 90 proof spirit. So, a little fun fact for you. But this one is, as you can see, as you can imagine, just a little more intense version of the traditional Maker's Mark. I try not to give a ton of, and I'm guilty of it a little bit, I guess, but I try not to give a ton of personal opinions on these reviews. But in my opinion, I can't help but mention this. I think Maker's Mark is one of the most disrespected, overlooked, underestimated distilleries in Kentucky and in the entire United States. I almost feel like because it became so big so early, before I shouldn't say all of you, but 99% of you were into bourbon, I was into bourbon, you knew Maker's Mark. And that's not their problem. For a long time, by the way, in the 70s and 80s, they couldn't produce enough. It was the coolest thing on the block, and people were driving to Kentucky to get it, and they couldn't make enough. Now before that, they were desperate to sell a bottle like everybody else was during those times. But just because they're a name brand, just like anybody, Ford or Walmart or any big brand now, McDonald's, just because they're mainstream, that doesn't mean they didn't do something tremendous along the way to become that. They earned that. They're a name brand for a reason. They make a really good product at a very affordable price. And again, for someone personally who likes the wheated recipe, I think it's one of the best values you can get out there. The traditional, the 46 is probably my personal favorite, but this cask strength is extremely good as well. The cask strength is going to run you about $55 or so. It started out in just the 375s and now is available in the 750s. And you can actually get the 46 in cask strength occasionally at the gift shop. I've never had the opportunity to taste that one. I would love to. If anybody has a sample, send it my way. All right, so a lot of talking. We're over 14 minutes into this and we haven't even tasted the spirit. Again, hope you don't mind the conversation, but I at least felt that being the legendary name and distiller and pioneer in this industry, that we deserved to at least cover a little bit of that history. So the spirit itself, I got a nice healthy pour there, didn't I? I was busy talking and decided to just get crazy. I love this. I love the nose on this, guys. It's buttery and sweet and vanilla and caramel and everything you want in especially a wheated bourbon. Not a lot of the spice. A little more spice on this one than the traditional because it's cask strength. But mouth-watering aroma. Dark fruits. apple pie, creme brulee, all the delicious, sweet, little bit of savory notes that you'd want on a bourbon, at least in my opinion. Let's give this a taste. Mouthfeel is absolutely tremendous. Coats the palate extremely well. It drinks really well for a bourbon that high in spirit. Proof, excuse me. It is, you know, if you've had Maker's Mark, you're familiar with Maker's Mark, just dial it up a little bit. You know, all those flavors, you're just going to dial it up just a handful. And another reason I like a cask strength offering is because I can, if I wanted to, and what the hell, for the time being, we'll just give this a whirl. I can take a little bit of water, control how much I'm going to add. Not that that's going to do much, but oftentimes a little bit of water can actually go a long way in changing a cask strength offering. Let this one rest and mingle for a little bit and try it again. Oh, quick sidebar. One of you out there in viewing land, I appreciate the feedback, had commented on my last review that some of your biggest influencers in whiskey had advised to, you know, let a whiskey breathe for about a minute each year that the whiskey had aged. I replied to that gentleman, hey, listen, great idea. I actually typically do that, or at least try to follow that when I'm not behind camera here, in front of camera, I should say. But I would hate for you guys to sit there and watch me look at a glass of whiskey for minutes on end while the camera runs and the time continues to tick away. So that's why typically in these reviews, I let it breathe for a second and pretty much dive right in. And again, I like to break into bourbons for the first time in front of you all very often. Tonight, withstanding, I'm not trying this for the first time, as you can tell. Nice Kentucky hug, but really, really does drink well for a spirit that strong. I'm ready to give this a score. I will give Maker's Mark cask strength 7.9. Yeah, really nice pour. Pretty good value, I would agree as well. Again, hope you guys were okay with this kind of a long diatribe that I went on, but I felt like it was my duty as your whiskey coach. And guys, I haven't even talked about Michter's or 1792 or Rip Van Winkle, or you know, some of the Four Roses offerings, or some of the Old Forester offerings, or Blood Oaths, or some of the E.H. Taylors, or Pikesville, or Rittenhouse, or Sazerac, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I felt like, God, if anybody needs a little minute or two, or in this case, 19 of my attention and my respect, it should be the folks at Maker's Mark. So again, thank you all for your patience. Thanks for joining me this evening in this review. And until next time, and as always, glasses up.